Welcome, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining this session. I can see we're really quite a number of us joining from different parts of the world, and it's really exciting to be part of this discussion. My name is Christian Chito. I am the program advisor with Conducive Space for Peace, which is a Danish-based organization that works on transforming the global peace building system to create and foster the agency of local peace builders. Today, we're having a very, very important discussion, which I really hope that you will be part of and find the time to get to engage in it. But before we get into the substance of the conversation today, allow me to first maybe explain some housekeeping rules that will help us to really maximize this moment that we'll have together tonight. First, if it's not your chance to be talking, please make sure that you're muted, and that will allow us to not be distracted during the conversation. Second, if you have a question, we will have a time for a Q&A session when we'll be able to engage more broadly with all the presenters that will be speaking with us. And without further ado, I would like maybe to give a few words to welcome us in this space. And this space that is designed to be a space that is safe, a space that we all feel part of. And to be very precise, we'll be talking among 3 women peace builders from different backgrounds, from different contexts, who will share their experiences of what it meant living through this very pandemic time. Now, the starting point of this conversation is 2020. The starting point of this conversation is 2040. So the 3 women peace builders will be looking backward and speaking and sharing to a group of young peace builders from different parts of the world what they had felt were the main moments of these experiences and what messages they would like to transmit to the coming generation on what it means to be moving forward together. The importance of this theme is I think I was muted there for a second, and now I'm back. I don't know who muted me, but here we go. But I was just saying that the importance of this framing of this conversation as we think of moving forward together is looking at it from a campfire environment. Now, a campfire is, in all traditions, the place where we all have learned stories from our grandparents, from our grandparents, who have told us what happened before us. It's also the place that unites communities that are divided. It's a place where we find comfort and warmth around our very loved ones. And I'm hoping that this very space virtually is going to be a campfire. We all are bringing our different pieces of wood from our different places, from our different experiences, and we will be contributing to this discussion and allowing this fire to keep us as warm even in this very, very moment. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite us in the discussion. First of all, I'll say a few words about our presenters, our panelists. We have Ian Stahl, who is a woman peace builder and works with Conducive Space for Peace. We have Rashida Namlonda, who is an artist and the founder of the Sophia Institute of Art in Uganda. We have Namfundo Laza, who works with the Onyuke Foundation and is going also to be engaging in this conversation with all of us. And finally, we'll be hearing from John Paul Ledrak, who does not deserve any more introduction because I'm sure most of us know him, but he's also a senior fellow at the Humanity United. Now, where this conversation is going to go is we'll give to each one of the panelists 10 minutes about to welcome us around this campfire that we've created virtually and to share in those 10 minutes a story. What would they want to tell us if we were those young peace builders in 2040, know about their experiences living through this pandemic? Now, without further ado, I would like to now give the floor to Mia to be able to start us around the campfire. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christian. I'm really pleased and feel honored to be able to sit around this campfire with you tonight in Denmark. It's almost night, it's at least dark. But so let's imagine we're sitting around the campfire. It's on the outskirts of a dense forest. It's on top of a beautiful mountain. I am aged 74. It's 20 years from now. And I'm still at that time continuing my vocation in peacebuilding, trying to create space for sharing experiences among young and old, and hold that aspiration for bringing greater peace to communities. That was my aspiration also in 2020. It marked a critical turning point for the field of peacebuilding, and I'll tell you a story about how I lived through this this time. I was in Denmark when the pandemic spread around the world in 2020. We had lockdown and we quickly shifted to virtual communication. It wasn't too difficult for our organization. It's fairly small. We were used to working, Christian in Belgium or Congo, Sveta in Sri Lanka, and we were working across borders anyhow. But the difficult thing was actually that we quickly understood how difficult conditions and struggles our colleagues and friends in conflict-affected countries were facing, especially those being remote from capitals and still being in lockdown measures. People were suffering, gender-based violence increasing. At this time in 2020, you know, many young people lost their jobs, many lost incomes, many struggled to put food on the table. The kids and youth were sent home from school, and they were sitting in small houses and trying to move on and trying to kill the time. Our colleagues were talking to us about these things, but we were sitting here in Denmark. I was sitting here. I was in Denmark at the time, and it was actually pretty difficult to be in a place that was pretty safe, and then knowing that colleagues and friends were going through these struggles. It felt a little bit like the time of the earthquake in Nepal, not many years ago, but still some years ago, where I wish I would have been there. It's my second home, and I wish I could have been there instead of far from where the people suffering were. I felt it the same way this time when this crisis unfolded. One important thing that happened was the shifting of the engagement to virtual space. It changed many things. We thought it would address the power inequality globally and among people within the peacebuilding field. It didn't always. In fact, it sometimes created access and possibility to engage in discussions by local peacebuilders or peacebuilders from conflict-affected countries into global discussions. But these spaces and dialogues were often defined by those holding power to define priorities in peacebuilding, even at country level, define how to write proposals and define reporting requirements and so forth. And this, as we all know, has not created an enabling space for locally led peacebuilding. So, and personally at that time, I suffered from the lack of direct engagement with local peacebuilders, peacebuilders from conflict-affected countries, basically from lack of inspiration, connection, relationships, in that ongoing collaboration I had been so used to. It was really painful to be a peace builder working in a virtual space. And it came to be very clear to me how important the face-to-face engagement and in-person engagement was in my work and in the kind of peace building work that I find is important. Also in innovating how different perspectives were brought into the space. Yes, we did try to create those spaces in 2020, virtual face-to-face spaces. But we still miss that being in the same space with our full persons and bodies and minds and hearts. Sometimes we we try to create different spaces, and Mfundo and I actually try to create one such space where we facilitated a dialogue with women peacebuilders across 8 countries, very small group, and we facilitated across a group of people engaging face to face, sitting in a circle, holding talking sticks, like this one or this one. And taking turns and really listening to one another and pondering together and writing, or well, both writing and reading poetry for 3 days, meeting twice a day. So it has sparked this situation of virtual communication. I think it will stay with us also because of the climate crisis. I think I thought it would stay with us, and now I need to get into 2020 again. It did stay with us. Unfortunately, peacebuilding changed, but it did create that first spark of we need to reinvent, not shift everything to the virtual space, but find new ways of engaging that also holds limited relationships and trust building at the core of it. Yeah, and basically also what was difficult was seeing local peacebuilders struggling so hard to retain funding for their peacebuilding and human rights work. Everything showed that the lockdown measures, the COVID-19 responses were fueling existing conflict dynamics. And so the work of peacebuilders who could relate directly to communities in conflict affected countries were more important than ever. There was no question about that. It was obvious at the time, and still funding was actually shifted to other fields, sometimes to health, which you can definitely argue for the importance of, but nobody at the time saw the critical importance of retaining funding for peacebuilding. And we did at the time in 2020, we did consultations with local peacebuilders, clearly showing, and also with international peacebuilders, clearly showing that the conditions for local peacebuilders were so much tougher than for those of international organizations. And it was difficult to sustain things. On the other hand, it really raised, it became so obvious that local peacebuilders were at the forefront and front line of peacebuilding, that they should be leading all peacebuilding efforts, and we needed to reconstruct the whole peacebuilding framework to accommodate that, to be able to stand for internationals to say, how can we make ourselves useful and not actually coming in with predefined priorities and thinking that we knew better. So this sparked a lot of discussions, and what was great about 2020 that Black Lives Matter, the movement, also influenced the peacebuilding space. So these power inequalities, suddenly it was possible, even at PeaceCon, to have broad discussions, in-depth discussions, being very frank about decolonizing aid, being very frank about power inequalities and racism in peacebuilding. So since this was the agenda of conducive space for peace, it was really an important moment to see that. This it sparked. So I would like, if I may, read a poem to you to illustrate also the kind of thinking that was sparked, also in moments where it didn't look so dark, but also looked like there would be openings coming out of this crisis. Would that be okay?
Yes, go for it. Yeah.
I'll do it. A portal opens as crisis unfolds in economies, health, homes. People lose their jobs, strive to survive, and yet solidarity blooms at the brink of the downfall of humanity. A portal opens, reminding us that we're connected, that we're human beings with vulnerabilities and strengths, and that this core will be our lifeline, our portal to a new way of being in this world. Crises come, let our numbness wither, wake us on the brink of darkness, when we can still discover the world as a bed of flowers in the morning sun, when it awakens to a new day, when we can still discover ourselves anew, in our essence of humanity, naked and yet with an abundance of beauty, love, despair, sadness, between darkness and light, creating space for others, giving life its true form, giving peace its true form. I read the poem just to illustrate that a lot of, while I think my work has always been very value driven, and dignity being very much at the core of things. I think we were challenged in 2020 in this regard, but there was also momentum for change. So it was actually okay to talk about dignity, to talk about how to change the system, to work in a different way. So basically, when we approached, so that was a very good thing. But when we approached the end of the year, around the 7th, 8th of December, suddenly COVID-19 came closer to Denmark, and we went into a big lockdown. My children, aged 15 and 19, had been in close contact with people with COVID-19, and suddenly I was trying to juggle a lot of things between Peacebuilding conference, testing of children, and all kinds of things, and recognizing that that's the reality of all of us at this time, that this has been the reality for colleagues in conflict affected countries for a long time. It hasn't been the reality here in Denmark, but it is now. And I take a lot of inspiration from the resilience of colleagues and friends who have managed to pull through this time. I'm going to draw on that in dealing with my own family situation and juggling work and family. And I think that, so for you young people sitting at this top, I'll finish now because you're probably tired of listening, but I think some main lessons for me is to stay resilient, to draw on that resilience that your ancestors and us, at least a generation ago, showed in 2020. Hold your values of equity, dignity, respect, compassion at the center, because that proved to be at the center and really important in 2020 when we needed to shift the way the global peacebuilding system works. And then work together despite the virtual space, despite shifting into new ways of communicating. Retain the emphasis on trust, relationship building, and don't underestimate the importance of creating space and holding space for those kinds of conversations. So I hope that's the fireplace is still going. So I think I will pass the talking stick to my colleague, maybe passing it back to Christian. That's up to you. But otherwise, at least, yes. So I pass it to you, which you can then pass on to Namfunda or Ashida.
Thank you very, very much, Mia, for that beautiful story that you've shared with us. And thank you so much for really bringing us through the moments that you had experienced in 2020 during this pandemic and what it meant to you personally, what it meant to the things that you care, to the mission that you care for in peace building, what it also meant to you as a woman, as a mother who's juggling, taking care of your family and your kids, while at the same time taking care of other work-related issues that you were involved in. For those who are joining us now, just wanted you to feel part of this conversation. We are around a virtual campfire, and this conversation is really about taking a look backward. We are in 2040, and we are trying to look at what 3 amazing women peace builders had experienced in this time. Now, we've just heard from Mia, and I just want to notify that we are having someone who is drawing and trying to visually capture these ideas. The purpose of this conversation is really for us to feel at ease, to feel at home, and to all of us engage from the heart. It's not a head-oriented exercise. We are here to really just be human to the extent that we can. Now I want to give the baton that I was given by Mia. Thank you very much. And I'm passing it on to Rashida Namulondo from Uganda. And I'm sure the fire is still alive.
Okay, for those of you who can we unmute ourselves? This is my fire log. I'm by the campfire. And where I come from, before they start the fire, there's something they say, oh, ratuka. So I'm just gonna, say it in English. So when I say bonfire, you all say more fire. Can we unmute ourselves for just that bit? So bonfire.
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 Hey, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, children. Because now I'll be telling the story to my younger ones or youth. Yes, so when I was about your age in 2020, I remember I had been running a small organization for about, I would say 4 years at that time. And we had struggled with key things. At that time, where I came from, people didn't speak about depression. They didn't talk about trauma. So in our days, you were considered strong. You were supposed to move on, be a man, like they used to say. So around that time, I had figured a way after my experience when I lost my mother. That was 4 years before the 2020. I had gone through trauma, depression, and I'd seen other people go through it. And I told myself, why don't we talk about this thing? So I had founded an organization called the Sophie Monica Institute to honor my mother, because at that time, it was her death that had brought these things, these facts to life, that trauma is real and that depression is real, and that it does affect our judgment, that it does affect our peacekeeping inabilities, the ability to empathize, the ability to step in those shoes, the ability to keep peace. So that's why I'd started this kind of work. So around 2020, I'd been doing it for 4 years and I'd struggled. I tried to, let me say, sell the idea to the people that I was with at that time, trying to tell them this is important, this is key, this is relevant in peace building in our communities. And I had started to see some success. Things were doing well for me. People had started to appreciate this. People had started to sort of understand. And around that time, I'd managed to convince a very big organization to give me my first grant, my first ever grant, little ones. 4 years of hard work, and that was my first ever grant. So I was planning to go out to the communities. These communities at that time, I channeled my work to do a work with violent extremism. You're so lucky that you're now in a world where violent extremism doesn't exist. When we were growing up around that age, there was an era where people were fighting over ideologies, over religious ideologies, political ideologies, and it had become a very contagious disease. It had become a wildfire. And that's what I was trying to prevent and step in, with the thought that trauma, healing, could help people empathize, could help people understand that we come from the same place, or deal with their own wounds so they can be able to see clearly and reason with clarity without the pain, because wounds give back wounds. So you're very lucky that now we're in a world without violent extremism. And I thank all the players in our days who have made us come to this world. But at that time, this was a disease, and that's what I was trying to do. So around March 14th, as I'd planned to go down to a community called Bujiri community, where the highest recruitment of women and young people into extremist groups was happening, and where we had identified it had happened because of what I had termed in my own term, generational trauma. It's a thing that had been passed on, narratives that had been passed on from generations, that this group did this to us, so we don't like them. And I feel like these people carried wounds, and they'll continue to be hurt because they went to extremist groups and then lost husbands, lost property, lost their identity. So as we're planning to go and start a workshop, we had a world pandemic. It was called COVID-19. I still think about it and reflect what happened. So at that time, I was in the middle of planning this workshop, and I had all the news going on, and I gave I say to myself, well, the pandemics, the crises everywhere in the world, it surely can't be that bad. But on March 14th, our government put a ban on any movement. on any interaction with the community. And at that time, I just come back from seeing the women, from hearing their stories. Most of the women were wives to returnees, people who had come back from terror groups or extremist groups, and they were trying to get rehabilitated in the community, and they weren't given a chance. You know, they were discriminated, they were isolated. So exactly the same group I wanted, because they had wounds that could get back to being wounds to other people and create a circle where the victim is now the you know, the criminal, the perpetrator. So after experiencing their stories, and I'm told I cannot access them, I cannot go down to the country, to the county side or the village side to access these women, I striked. And at that time, I wasn't thinking about the pandemic, I'll be honest. It had not showed signs in Uganda. We didn't have any cases. So I'm saying, surely this is not a priority. This is being exaggerated. But then I had to calm down and follow the facts and understand that we have to live with this and we have to find ways of doing it. I was devastated. If you do understand, after 4 years of just trying to develop this methodology and trying to get a lot of people on players, this was my first time that I have a person who's interested in funding this. And now we have to stop the work, we have to stop the projects. And I know that the women need this because, you know, in the middle of the pandemic, other things don't stop. Violent extremism doesn't stop in the middle of the pandemic. No, it continues. Hate narratives that, you know, that get us to hate each other continued, at least in our times. I'm glad that we have a peaceful world now, but in our times continued, and the pandemic was creating space for that. All of a sudden, people were now isolated in their own small groups and continuing these narratives, because this is a problem with the pandemic. It actually defines the injustices, it defines the inequalities, it defines the unequal resource mobilization. All of a sudden, people notice that, oh, they were right all this time. The government doesn't care about this. Look, there's them, there is us. So the pandemic was creating a lot of this, and we were scared, we were worried. There was a pandemic, and there were other little pandemics about to explode. And this is work that we've done for years, and we were confused. So I remember sitting down and asking myself, what have I done wrong? How does this all come down? Why am I stuck? Why am I stuck in my house? I can't access the people I have fought for all these years. I can't do the programs I've wanted to do. And I felt so helpless. And it was hard. I spent a month in my house sleeping and just, you know, putting my legs up. I'd gone what they call the emotional burnout, where I told myself I don't care about the world. But after a month, I told myself, I need to find a way of accessing this community. I need to find a way of breaking through. And so I followed the news and listened to everything. We're working with a community that had no access to the virtual world, no access to any space. There was no way of breaking through. And I remember going down to the community and meeting the security guard, the security of the place, and saying, I can follow all the COVID regulations. Please just give me the time to talk to these women and have the social distancing in place and have all these places that they've given us. And it worked. And I remember cutting down 50 people to about just 10 people. And seeing these women in this workshop with, you know, with all their masks, it occurred to me, this is our new reality. This is our new reality. And I remember after the workshop, I had to think, what I'm doing is not sustainable. And that's why I developed what I call the communication training about if I could empower the women to actually go to their local radios, because now I did realize that there's going to be a time when we can't access our communities, and now we need to empower them to take control of the programs. And so what I decided to do was do a whole training of trainers so that I could have peace builders, peace ambassadors in the communities that could continue the projects that were not there. It was a very successful project. I remember, I'm just going to read a memoir that I wrote in the journal, just watching the women going through and adhering to the COVID restrictions and still enjoying the workshop. And in the end, looking back now, Bujiri does not have the issues that we fought, because 20 years down the road, the community itself has generated over 1,000 peace ambassadors. And I realized that this is the way that we need to go. We need to empower the communities themselves to be able to sustain and continue these projects. And I'll just read a memo from what I wrote observing the women that time. I said, I found joy in the women's smiles. This is dated July 2020, it doesn't have a date. I found joy in the women's smiles, their laughter and dancing. Their pain was stitched like hymns on their dresses, but they carried it gracefully with the joy of just being able to be. The joy of just being able to be, because the pandemic at that time made us count our blessings that we're alive, and that's important. So I enjoyed telling you this story, and I hope that you do continue to understand and create spaces for people as we move forward. The world is better now, but there's still spaces for you to contribute. And thank you for listening to this story of my youth when I was around your age. And I know that we are here today because of all the different stakeholders that contributed when the Future Space came in, a lot of people who gave us the space, who gave us the opportunity to share the work that we had done with the women so that the women could get the voice and continue this work even when we're not in the communities. And I'll say goodnight for now, and I'll wave with you my fire rod and say bonfire.
Thank you very, very much, Rashida, for sharing and for bringing us again in your experience of 2020, particularly looking at what it meant working with very delicate and sensitive issues such as trauma, depression, issues that do not necessarily get given a lot of attention even in this time of 2040. We're having a lot of people who have been facing mental health issues and who are dealing and struggling with it. But even up to date in 2040, we still have a little bit of a taboo feeling around this conversation. So, but I'm really happy that you had started this work way, way before. And it's really meaningful to us and it builds our confidence to actually feel like this is something we need to come forward to and should be considered as peace building. Now, I would like to also bring this moment to South Africa, and I'll be passing the baton to Nomfundo Walaza as well, who will share with us what it meant for her to live through 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian, and thank you for the introduction, and hello everyone, everywhere. So I bring a talking stick, and this is a pipe that the women in the village where I come from used to smoke. And as they would be holding the pipe and taking a smoke, they would say sometimes when the discussions were hard, there would be a moment where they would say "Ndisachaya," which means I'm still smoking, which also means I'm still pondering. So this is a moment to ponder the past and to ponder where we're going. So young people, as I ponder the way forward for your generations, I ask myself, what do I want to share with you that we learned the hard way in 2020? Often after crisis, we tend to forget very quickly what it was like, what happened, what we learned, and what still lingers. And instead, we quickly get back to the old ways. In doing so, we risk forgetting what were the important lessons of the time we inhabited. And as humans, we know that if we forget our histories and our stories, we're doomed to repeat things again. To say the year 2020 felt surreal is an understatement. I remember our team had just come back from a field visit in Wau, South Sudan. We had been in Wau to introduce our new team and help the members of the cohort of 24 young South Sudanese who were accompanying agree on financial guidelines. The year before, we received a generous donation from our donors and had major plans for 2020. We were looking forward for a year of consolidating our work we had started about 3 years before and dreaming about the future and possibilities that lie ahead. No one would have anticipated that month after month we would delete the diary entries, cancel the many planned visitations and important meetings and end up with none of the many activities planned having taken place. But no one would also have anticipated that we would look back at that year and find out that we had achieved more than what we could see. And I want to express the word see and hear, because I think 2020 made us see more and hear more, and more than what we could have considered humanly possible. We relied more on seeing and hearing as we could no longer touch and feel. Personally, I lived in a flat. I found myself in a grounded state. I spent a lot of time looking at a row of trees in front of my office window, which are just in front of me as I speak to you now, as I prepared for yet another Zoom call. Most of my day was spent thinking and reflecting on the agenda of the forthcoming meetings, or simply looking at the trees as people were talking, and I was trying to listen and stay present. And I want to underscore the word present, because we had to be present. On Zoom, I attended accompanying calls of various meetings, wedding celebrations, funerals, and important connection check-ins with family. If it wasn't Zoom calls, it was on WhatsApp, audio calls accompanying the South Sudanese, talking to family members or supporting a friend or elderly person in need. Occasionally, there would be moments to hold a space for a colleague who had lost a loved one through COVID-19 or natural ailment. Occasionally, I would allow myself to let the tears flow, and this felt incredibly liberating and cleansing. I could allow myself to be human in a way that office space did not allow or permit it. I became more conscious of what I was eating, and by the end of the year, I became sick and tired of cooking my own food and started Googling the best recipes for what ingredients I have bought that needed preparation. I became more conscious of the world and the suffering around me. I saw more street people. My state of being a privileged individual was brought to the sharp focus, and I felt uncomfortable expecting others to do as much as I do, particularly the South Sudanese, who were much more in difficult circumstances than I am. I could not escape myself because I was not on the road all the time, busy and not even stopping to hear my heartbeat. I was locked up in a house and forced to confront myself. I became more and more conscious of the need to exercise, to keep my body healthy so as to be able to think clearly and not to be prone to wallow in the sadness and suffering that surrounded me. The need to write the many stories from the field that I had for years found excuses to delay because I was too busy traveling and working was no longer to be ignored, and I started writing. All in all, I felt like I was living in a dream whose end would drag for months on an end, but it's good to sit here today, looking at the time in history and reflecting on challenges, encounters, and lessons learned. Despite the challenges and the many losses suffered, there were a lot of lessons learned, even a few silver linings. One of the reflections that I want to bring forward was that we stopped traveling. The assumption that as long as we had money to travel, we could be seen to go and see all the people we wanted to see was no longer present in our midst. So money wasn't the answer to all the problems. We had to sit in one place and do the work as if we were everywhere. We were forced to find innovative ways and creative ways, forms of connecting and accompanying the South Sudanese colleagues we were working with. We became more acutely aware of the difficulties they faced in connecting with the world. And this for me was brought by the fact that we'll start with a Skype call. That didn't work. We went onto WhatsApp. If that didn't work, we'll eventually get to be talking on a straight line. That cost a lot of money, but that had to be done, and we had to do it. We could not convene conversations in a circle and be with each other in the way that we're accustomed to. There were no hugs to be had or a pat on the shoulder to acknowledge pain and reassure a colleague, that all will be well. We were forced to up our strategies to reach out more, which meant that we were hearing more, and we had heard when we met than more than when we hear when we meet physically with other people. We discovered that it was difficult to have a 9-to-5 job, and weekends became weekdays. And I started a rhythm of working for 6 weeks and taking a pause on the 7th week, because that was the only way that I was going to survive. Otherwise, I was working 24/7 and there was no pause. Burnout was real. And I want to, Rashida, you talked about trauma. I'm a psychologist. Burnout was real. And we constantly, and it was a threat that loomed around the corner. We thought of ways that Peacebuilders can occasionally go away to reconnect to themselves. And in one instant, we sent a couple from Zimbabwe. They came to Cape Town to have a break with no agenda, just to pause and breathe. Gender-based violence increased, and this became a focus area for many local actors. And so the women who were peace builders in local situations were finding themselves having to deal with gender-based violence towards themselves and having to help others. I mean, that was such a huge mammoth task for them to take. They had to find innovative ways of accompanying each other and soothing each other's pain in the midst of a pandemic. Police brutality escalated as members of the security services were deployed to monitor lockdown and misinterpreted their marching orders and became trigger happy. And many people died as a way that, I mean, it was supposed to be everybody sits at home and the police looks after you, but the same police who were supposed to look after you were actually killing people on the streets. We were forced to look at things that we took for granted and find ways of changing and adapting. We were forced to rethink the simple notion of support. What does support mean? How do you support people when you cannot visit them? How do you support others when you can't touch them? How do you support people when, in actual fact, when problems occur, you're not there and you can't actually even talk to them if the connectivity is a problem? We're forced to listen differently and pay more attention to what was being said. And I want to underscore that, just to pay more attention to what was being said. We take for granted that we listen, and sometimes we prize ourselves in listening. But when you have to talk to people over Zoom, you listen differently. You listen more attentively. When you talk to somebody who's sitting in South Sudan and is having a difficult time, you listen for the signs as a psychologist that maybe that person is in danger and what can I do to help them through that danger. Local actors discovered new ways of supporting their communities. And I want to tell a story of a refugee woman who received a little bit of money from one of our donors. And instead of feeding herself, she went and built a garden with local women. And that in a way meant that she wasn't eating alone, she was eating with others. And sometimes I think how we worry about, we will give money to people and they will abuse it. And there were stories that people were actually much more wanting to help others when there was COVID-19 than wanting to feed themselves. There was also a woman who was part of the same cohort of women who took her money and received other fleeing refugees from another country and had something called taking tea together in order to welcome them and sit around with them on a campfire and actually have tea. And so there were these moments of people, going beyond themselves to try and meet each other people and be generous to each other. We learn to be patient. And I remember this, and I can't, there's something, we talk about patience being a virtue, but this time we really learned to be patient because things didn't happen at a pace that we were accustomed to. So we had to wait for things to happen. And also that we had to sync with the rhythm of those who were outside of our frame of working. And some of the things that I think were the turning points for me was that, and which I reflected upon, was that funding and support for local actors has to be done differently. Giving support directly to those who are close to the action is key if we are to ensure sustainability in peace in war-torn countries. And we had proven that actually people don't abuse money. They actually use it in order to be able to sustain their families. And that in itself brings about peace. We also learned the need to make real what we mean by support during that time. What exactly do we mean by support? I think we ban this word of support very easily. I mean, we talk about support as if it's here. But in COVID-19, in 2020, we had to think about what exactly do we mean when we mean support? And what does it mean to invest in people so that they can actually have the agency to do what they had to do when we're not there? And I think there was a realization that if we don't invest in people, Nomfundo Walaza flying to South Sudan is not going to solve the problems of South Sudan. The South Sudanese are the ones who are to solve the problems of South Sudan, and they need that, not empowerment because that's the wrong word, but there is a need to be able to invest in people in such a way that they can actually take care of what is happening in their context. And these are the ways that I think we can do the work of peace building in a way that doesn't mean that we need to fly in experts, but realize that local experts are themselves the people who are going to shift what is happening. We were also confronted at the time with acts of resilience and survival of the human spirit that were brought forward that we had never seen before. As we watched how from WhatsApp groups, young people helped others to bury their dead and to reach out to welcome those who were displaced by ravages of war. Having large meetings, that's one of the things we're also kind of, I think, coming out of that situation is that having large meetings of talking heads is not going to be a solution for shifting the terrain of peace building. And that's why we are advocating the notion of telling stories, telling our stories, talking about how, you know, appearing in a conference all dressed up and looking like all dolled up, and not talking about the fact that in actual fact, I cried I cried more this year than I've cried just being here and just realizing what the world is all about. And also connecting humanly to other human beings. And we also discovered that we are all forced to find new ways of collaborating and working across borders. Mia talked about how we worked with the Norwegian mediators across a facilitated unyoke session. Unyoke, by the way, is taking the yoke of a cow. In my language, we say meaning that they are harnessed, even though they are thin, because you go to plow the field. And when you take the yoke, then the cows get a time to rest. But unyoking Peacebuilders is bringing them to a place where we can, they can relax and recoup and recharge. I think we also discovered that we work the different opportunities that we took for granted, like the unyoke sessions that can be done virtually and the other things. And I want to finish off by saying that 2020 taught us never to forget that after all is said and done, whoever we are and wherever we are, umntu ngumntu ngabantu. I am because you are. You are because I am. Ndiyabulela, bantwana bam. I really wish this story will inspire you to be able to do the work that has to be done, not in the way that we did before 2020, but from the vantage point of what we've learned and how we adapted and changed in 2020 going forward. Enkosi, Amago.
Thank you very, very much, Nofundo, for this wonderful story and for really enriching our experiences of what you had gone through and really sharing some of these deep insights on being living in solidarity with one another, understanding that through difficult times, like you have been doing through Anyuki Foundation, supporting women groups in South Sudan, and really across boundaries, even virtually, to be able to stay connected, to stay present, even during these Zoom calls and Zoom meetings, to be present with one another's suffering is such a beautiful wisdom for us to take forward in this 2040. Now, we have covered beautiful stories around this campfire. I'm seeing new faces joining. Please remember to take a piece of wood from wherever you are. We are all really trying to keep this place as warm as we can. And now I would like to ask our three presenters, before we give the floor to the rest of us, because we all are contributing to this beautiful story and thinking on how to move forward together. Maybe a moment for the presenters to ask and reflect on each of the other's presentation. If you have one reflection question that you'd like to ask to the other, so that we can learn from your own reflection, listening to one another. This is one thing that at least Nomfundo has emphasized, to being present. So let's see, what do you have to ask to each other? What did you learn? What did you hear as you were listening?
Maybe I do have to interact. I want to ask something to Nomfundo. I keep practicing your name. So thank you for sharing your story and your journey. I felt your Zoom frustration. We've all been there. And thank you for reminding us that we actually went through it, because we're in 2040 and in the world is a better place right now. So I do want to reflect on when you say that we have to invest in the communities. And I think it's something that my journey also made me realize, and that's how I've changed a lot of my strategies of that. We need to invest in the people on the ground. And I just want to hear from you, or like, what are some of the strategies or way forwards of programs that you have that you have implemented since 2020 to sort of make sure that, especially, and I'm asking because for me, a lot of the situation or the challenges with this virtual world of pandemic that we experienced in 2020 was that the people who really, really needed this help were people who could not access the virtual world. And that's what sort of I want to hear a lot of what worked in to get access to those people who could not be on Zoom, who could not be on phone, who don't even know what social media is, because a lot of times the people that actually are suffering the most with a lot of discord when it comes to conflict. And yeah, thank you.
Can I answer, Christian?
Yes, you may. You may.
I think, Rashida, just to say that when we started this work, one of the critical things is that we were very much intentional about investing in people, and the Anyop sessions that the young South Sudanese took, we took them to various places for a week on end, were really dedicated and getting to get them to tell their own stories. And I think we underestimate the power of people coming together to tell their stories in order to connect, so that when they go back home, they can actually support each other. So for me, the first line of investment is investing in people being able to tell their stories, showing each other who they are. So we often think about money first, but I think if we think people first, and we think about what we give as confidence, so it's not about capacity building, but confidence building, and getting the young people to have confidence in themselves to be able to do this work. The other layer of that is, providing these young people with money so that they can have connectivity, so that they can actually be able to speak to us. So that in actual fact, the money that is provided to them, sometimes they use it not only to have connectivity, but also to be able to go to hospital, to be able to feed their families, to be able to do. So the investment is about, because if we were to form organizations, the money would go into, building and electricity and a fax machine or a machine that does this and that, or a laptop, or even a desk and all of that. But some of that money really goes to the young people to be able to have dignity in life, so that they can be able to show up in communities and do what to do in a manner that is much more than, you know, so there's money involved, but that money is really about the person getting to feel that the investment is in them to be able to do the work that they do, because these young people are driven, they want to do peace work, but they're constrained by certain things that say you've got to do it in this way, but allowing them to find creative and innovative ways of doing peace and listening to their communities and responding according to what they feel is needed, rather than what we as outsiders think has to be done.
Thank you very much, Rashida, for that question. And thank you so much, Nofundo, for that beautiful answer. Now we're going to take one more question from the group, or one more comment, before we can open the floor as well to everybody else on this, around this virtual campfire. Yes, Mia?
Thank you. I would then like to ask a question to Rashida, and it relates to one comment that also, or a few comments that came in the chat. I think it's clear that all three of us have talked a lot about the importance of being, you know, really holding on to being present, being connected, listening, being in conversations that are long enough to tell our stories and listen to other people's stories. And someone noted specifically also that Mfundo, we actually have long conversations, and it's not like 15 minutes, it's long conversations where we tell stories and share stories. And that's part of upholding, for me, upholding myself at this difficult time. And so, Rashida, a question for you, because we also I have a colleague, Pascal in South Sudan, who recently also noted the inequality of how the conditions for upholding ourselves, that actually in psychosocial support, that in South Sudan, many internationals have to go out to whatever, rehabilitate and rest and so forth, and regain their strengths. But the Peacebuilders who live in South Sudan, they're listening to the people's stories every day. They're dealing with trauma and gender-based violence every day, and they're not giving the space to go anywhere to restore. And so I think my question to you, Rashida, is more in along those lines. How do you uphold yourself, and how do you see others around you? I think it's my Danish that it's not upholding the space, but you know, retaining yourself, holding yourself at this difficult time.
Okay, thank you for asking that. It's a kind of long answer to that, but I'll give it a short while. I think for me, way before the pandemic, I have been doing this work, and people are familiar with my work. It's just a lot about creating a platform for people to just talk and share conversation. And I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist. I'm an artist, and I realized how strong art is, the platform it gives. But taking a step back, I think in 2017, I used to listen to so many stories, I burnt out. I don't know how to explain that. And then I also realized, and this is key, that sometimes stories have the ability to re-traumatize. And so there was that balance for me, and that question for me, that also in 2017, now way before the pandemic, I had a big change of how I do the work I do. And that was, I went into drama and dramatizing a lot of the stories for the women, and also helping people tell their stories through theater or through drama. So it's not like a therapy session. It's not like, okay, sit there and then we go through all this, because in the end you have to do a lot of self-care. And if you listen like over to 5 women or men, or I don't know, like 10 stories, by the end of the day you traumatize your own self. And trauma is something that is in our conscious, it shows when you don't expect it. But also a lot of that time I was working with a lot of refugees, and there was a question of security and protecting their identity and protecting their story. And also teenagers. I was working with a lot of teenagers. So you go into a school and, you know, they don't have the maturity to keep each other's story. You know, there's also that thing about a story that the people in the circle have to be safe, that they do keep that story. I know I'm going too deep into like ethics and stuff like that. But just going to that, what I did realize was that these women live this thing. It's their reality, you know, it's every day. So even when they're telling you, it's not a story, they're just telling you their life. How do they see it differently? Because also that's a question. It's a question of taking care of your mental state, but it's a question of, do they see any change when they still finish telling you the story? And so that's why for us, we do a lot of drama. And I think there's a word for it, drama therapy, although we do something totally different, because a lot of our work is to kind of adapt it to the local context. And so what we really do is that we help them tell their story, or like, I'm just give you an example. So if Christian is A and maybe I'm B, so Christian will tell his story, and then I'll give it to, and then I'll do Christian's story, and then Christian will have to do my story. So in a way, I still understand. It's a fun way of expressing. It's like when we get to this space, even if it's sad stories, even if it's stories, it's still fun, but it's also very reflective, because then we can pick those nuances of what worked, what have we done, what have the women done without even noticing that has actually worked. And some of these solutions come through also this dramatizing a lot of these stories. So for me, I did make that decision for the communities I work with, and for myself. I don't know if it's a very clear method that I'm trying to explain, but sort of just instead of sitting around and just listening from story to story, just dramatize it. So in a way, there's that reflectiveness. There's also a sign of like entertainment, not entertainment, that a sign of just being involved in the process of creating the stories. So by the time they finish, and that's why when I read from my journal, I said their pain was stitched like hymns on their dresses, but they carried it gracefully with the joy of just being able to be. So even just when I'm telling Christian stories, not my story, so I'm able to tell it without being re-traumatized, I think, let me say that. And he's able to tell my story without being re-traumatized. But those stories are the same, even if they're different. I don't know. And then we're able to experience the both stories, and both people have had some sort of, I like to call this program an alternative therapy, some sort of fun. So because these communities can't go anywhere, and they're stuck in this, and it's their routine. So they need to be able to tell the story and learn from it, rather than just repeating their life to you. Because if you're new in the community, it seems like a story to you. For them, it feels like, I'm just telling what I did with my day. Are you sure that it has changed them? Have they reflected on that story when they leave? So it's a lot of the different methodologies, and also empowering the communities to also suggest things that work for them. For example, communities will suggest that, oh, can we, in the middle of the station, and they say, can we dance? Can we create a song to this? We feel we're in the mood of singing at this part, and just letting go with the flow and trusting them and letting them know that they're in control. So just the process for them is a work of what you're saying, like taking rest and taking care of yourself. Because I myself, I live in these communities. I mean, even if I can come to the city, I still come and face the communities in the city. So also for me, I don't get to go home with thousands and trillions and 200 stories in my head, which will traumatize me too.
I think we've just lost a little bit of.
That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rashida. Thank you so much for that sharing, indeed, on the power of stories as well, to be able to convey trauma. And I think it's important to understand that in the context of your work back in 2020, you were very keen on making sure that you take care of yourself and that you take care of your community, even as you deal with very, very difficult stories. Now, around this virtual campfire, we are in 2040, and there are quite a number of us. We all have heard stories, and I'm sure some of you would like also to share. And I wish we had more time to be giving everyone a moment to share. That would be the best thing to happen. But we would like maybe to ask one or two persons who have listened to these beautiful stories from Rashida, from Mia, and Nomfundo, as well to reflect on their perspective as youngsters in 2040. What do they take from listening to Rashida, Mia, and Nofundo? Who would be the brave one to start? We just want to try to put ourselves in those shoes of 2040. What do we take from listening to them? If anyone is ready, you can unmute yourself and we'll give you 2 minutes to share. Or you can ask a question. You don't have to share your own story. You can also ask a reflection question based on what you've heard.
I learned something beautiful, that was to be able to stop and listen to my heartbeat, to make a pause and remember myself why I'm doing what I'm doing. So thank you very much, and keep connected with people. Being vulnerable with others, that lights the fire to continue doing what we do. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gaviota. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else wants to share?
Hello?
Yes, Jennifer.
So for me, one of the key takeaways for me, that something that I really connected with, was how the COVID situation has really forced us all to be really present, and to also have better listening skills, because I liked Nofundo's comment about paying closer attention during Zoom meetings to people's voices, or, you know, using listening skills to find out what's really going on in people's lives, which I'm sure when you're out in the field, it's a little bit more difficult to do because there's so much distraction. There's time issues, funding issues. There's so many issues that you have to deal with. But when you're in a Zoom call, you are really forced to remain far more present and to try and really listen to other things that are not being said in the background. So.
Thank you very much, Geneva. I wonder if there's maybe one more from around the campfire.
I would like to offer my learnings as a rather elderly child, but let me say that Rashida has told me that the stories are the same, even when they're different. Thank you for that. And Namfundo has told me that I need to sync with the rhythm of those who are outside my way of thinking. Bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cynthia, for sharing. Anyone else around the campfire? Maybe a male voice? If I may try to ask a question, and I'll share a little bit of my personal reflection from what I've listened to tonight, is the power of being present, as Nofundo has pointed out. But it's also reminded me of my own personal experiences back in Eastern Congo. When I was growing up, it was at a time when the conflict was really, really destroying lives, and it still is. But in those days, I remember as a 7-year-old boy, I struggled with being present. I struggled with being in the moment and sharing and connecting with people, because what we really cared about in those days were survival. And it was difficult because we could not know what tomorrow held. Every day was a miracle. And being able to see the other day was a blessing. But I want to hear from your experiences, the three presenters tonight. Despite the fact that we know it's an exercise to try to be present in, or it was difficult, it was an important exercise to try to be present during the pandemic. What do you think are the very deepest of you really made it possible? Because it was not just the exercise of trying to train yourself to listen. What really created this presence for you in the midst of crisis? Because it was many things. I heard from Mia, for example, she was trying to work and at the same time to deal with family issues, at the same time to understand the complex world. But what really made it possible for you to develop presence? If you could share a few ideas, and maybe this could also resonate with those who might be living through a difficult time or in a conflict-torn country and who are trying to develop that presence. What could we tell them?
Did you point at me?
No, not necessarily. I'm just pointing to the three of you. If there's one who would be kind to help us with reflection on that.
Yeah. Can I offer a quick reflection? I think it's a very personal things, and each of us have to find what it is that can allow us to stay present, and we prioritize finding time for that. For me, it was going to a convent in a remote place of Denmark, and using poetry writing and going into nature while looking into Zoom meetings and so forth, and deep conversations in between. But I think it's really something I found that I needed to find my way of doing that at this critical time, and I think that goes for all of us.
Okay, I will go next. I think for me, the answer is easy for me because it's what's happening now. I think for me, it's not just even about keeping present. I think, but I answer the question and I answer it on behalf of all local peace builders, of everyone has had to found an organization, of like, how do you keep present? How do you keep going? How do you keep, in the day? And along many things, I think for me, it's the question of like what will I tell my children? Like, yeah, the question of like, what happens? Like, oh, like what happens when I'm older? What will I tell my children? What will I tell the people? What will I say basically 20, 30 years from now? What happened? And I think for me, that's very key for me to just kind of, I keep over a list of why do I do the things I do kind of list. I can't think, because being an artist, we keep, I don't know how to explain this. We keep, our minds are everywhere, if I'm to say that, and the burnouts and everything. So I just always ask myself, what will I say? What will I say 20 years from now, 30 years from now? And so that's just interesting that we're looking at 2040 now and we're reflecting back in 2020. And that pushes me and that keeps me present in even when I'm off track, even when I want to give up. I just ask myself, why am I doing this? And what will I tell my children? Like why am I, that for me keeps me grounded and keeps me here. And reflecting a lot, because that question helps you reflect, like, why am I doing the things I'm doing? And it seems technical, I don't know, it seems hard, but it's not. It's like 30, like you wake up every morning when you feel like you're losing it and just ask yourself, why am I doing the things am I doing? And what's giving me joy now and what's not giving me joy anymore? And just really holding on to that, and it keeps you present, it keeps you going through the day. And like we say, most of us work with people with difficult stories, and just keeps you, to come back to your center and to push forward. So I just want to share that, and I'm glad that we're having. I feel like I've had what to say. I've been able to say, because we're in 2040, so I say, yeah, this is what I did 20 years ago. So thank you for giving me that futuristic vision, like view of my life. Yeah.
Thank you. Can I just add one line?
Yes, please.
For me, I think it was the silence. That's what kept me present. It was being enveloped in silence, because I think what COVID-19 did was that it silenced a whole lot of things. We were no longer just you know, waking up in the morning, getting into a car, getting to work, listening to the traffic, coming home, having music, you know, and all of that. It was, and I think what kept me present was really enveloping myself in the silence and being not afraid of silence, because that's what also happens, is that we're so much afraid of silence, we don't want to be present in the silence. And then we don't hear our heartbeats, and then we don't hear ourselves because we fear what we may hear. But I think this year has allowed us to be able to, particularly if you're privileged, because you tell yourself, I'm sitting in a house, I've got my blankets, I've got my bed, I've got my electric blanket when it's cold, and I can't really complain much. And when you walk out and you see a person in the street sleeping under plastic sheathing, then that calls for all of us to be present. That calls for all of us to see that and to hear that. And so we become acutely aware of even our own capacity and what we had lost in the past, which is an ability to see, to hear. So we bend around these words, but they mean nothing because we don't hold them in our heart. And I think this year, 2020, has actually made us much more attuned to the silence that envelopes us, because that's where most of the learning will come from.
Thank you very much. I actually wanted to just take a few seconds of silence to experience that in this virtual space, if we may, just for 10 seconds before we can give the floor to John Paul Ledruck to share with us some very final closing remarks. Maybe we should observe 30 seconds of silence. Thank you. Now we can come back again and listen to John Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. And greetings to all of you in so many places and to these wonderful three sisters. I actually want to join this campfire. So if you have in fact passed me the talking stick, 2040. It's evening and the sun is about to set and my grandchildren are coming and they're shouting, tell us again. Tell us about Zoomlandia. We want to go. We want to go. What do you want to hear from Zoomlandia? Oh, Grandpa, tell us again. How did all the wars end? How did the people get healthy again? Well, come to the campfire, and I will tell you what I heard from my sisters, all three, Mia, Rashida, Nomfundo. Come sit in the circle. Why do we sit in a circle, Grandpa? Well, you sit in a circle so that no matter where you're seated, you can see the center. But what's in the center? Oh, in the center is where the heart burns. You can't see it. So you have to know how to listen for it. But Grandpa, how do you listen to the heart? Well, you have to get very quiet. My sisters said you have to be enveloped in silence. So get quiet Can you feel it? You have to go inside. You have to listen to what is beating. But how? How, Grandpa? How do you do that? Well, let's see. Look for a minute where you're sitting. Right there. Elizabeth. Joseph. You're sitting on the grass. Stand up a minute and look back down at the grass. What happens? Well, the grass got all smashed where I was sitting, but now it's standing back up. Put your foot on it again and then lift it. Okay, now what do you see? Well, it's standing back up again. Can you listen to the grass? I had an old friend once who told me, if you want to listen to the grass, you have to get so close you can hear the roots grow. Are those roots of that grass alone? No, but we can't see them. How do you know they're there? Because the grass keeps coming back up. So here is what my sisters said about how all the wars ended and how the people got healthy again. You have to watch, listen, connect like the roots. Notice what's around you. Listen for the spirit, even when you don't see it. And that's how you will learn to listen with the ear of the heart. Believe in the bounce back the grass makes. Trust in the roots. Follow the connections. This is what you will hear. You will hear the heartbeats of the people who have learned to bounce back even when everything hurt. And that is what my sisters told me in Zoomlandia. And I am ever so grateful that I was there.
And on that very note, still around the campfire, I would like us to engage in a very beautiful and simple exercise. And this is to send us away with the very powerful lessons and learning that we've listened from Mia, Rashida, Nomfundo, as well as from John Paul. What is one word that stands to you after listening today and that you would like to take with you into 2040 to the next generation? If you can type that in the chat section as we close the session.